Picture this. It's the fall of 2014. Halliburton planned to acquire Baker Hughes in a roughly $35 billion deal, but regulators stopped it. So, why did the merger fail, and why does it still matter today? Well, in this explainer, we're going to unpack exactly how this colossal corporate deal fell apart and why the lessons from this total collapse still echo across the energy sector right now.
I mean, $35 billion. That is a massive number. When corporate mergers of this sheer scale hit a brick wall, it sends absolute shockwaves through the entire global economy. This isn't just a story about two giant companies disagreeing on a price, This is the anatomy of a failure. It's a literal masterclass in what happens when soaring corporate ambition collides head-on with strict government antitrust enforcement.
Now, what's really interesting about this slide is the massive contrast here. On one side, you have this incredible initial deal valuation of $34.6 billion, but on the other side, a staggering $3.5 billion termination penalty that actually had to be paid out when the deal ultimately died. To understand how we get from a $35 billion dream to a multi-billion-dollar nightmare, we really have to start at the beginning.
Section 1. The oilfield services giants, who they are and what they do.
Okay, before we get into the boardroom drama, we need to establish exactly what these massive corporations actually do. They don't own the oil itself. They are what we call oilfield-services companies. Evaluating, drilling, completing, and extracting from oil and gas wells, these are incredibly expensive, risky, and highly complex endeavors. Energy producers rely entirely on these service companies to provide the drill bits, the chemical fluids, the cementing, the high-tech sensors, and the raw manpower just to get the hydrocarbons out of the ground safely. It basically boils down to four main steps in the oil field life cycle: exploration and evaluation, drilling, completion, and finally production. Both Halliburton and Baker Hughes operated across this entire highly complex life cycle. They were globally integrated suppliers. That means they didn't just do one of these things, they bundled all these services together to offer comprehensive, high-tech solutions to oil producers all around the world, whether that's on land or way out in ultra-deep water environments. And they did this on a scale that's hard to wrap your head around. According to the Department of Justice's 2015 complaint, we're talking about two global titans. Halliburton generated $23.6 billion in revenue with 65,000 employees operating in about 80 different countries. Baker Hughes? They brought in $15.7 billion with 43,000 employees. Both companies poured hundreds of millions into research and development. Joining forces meant combining two of the most powerful corporate armies in the entire energy sector.
All right, Section 2, the motivation to merge, surviving the oil crash.
So why try to merge two incredibly complex, massive competitors in the first place? Well, the catalyst was a massive macroeconomic shock in the fall of 2014. At that time, the world price of crude oil was sitting pretty comfortably at over $96 a barrel. But as 2014 turned into 2015, the bottom just completely fell out. Prices plummeted to just over $51 a barrel. That is a brutal drop of more than 40%. And when oil prices crash, energy producers stop drilling, which means oil field services companies lose their revenue streams almost overnight. Dwindling valuations forced the entire industry into absolute survival mode. So, the crucial point is that this merger was fundamentally a defensive strategy designed to go on the offensive. By combining, the companies planned to offset those falling oil prices and create a massive $2 billion in expected operational synergies, basically saving billions in overlapping costs. On top of that, it would expand their shale drilling market share by 23%. But the ultimate goal? It would finally give them the size and scale to aggressively challenge the undisputed market leader, Schlumberger. To make this happen, Halliburton came to the table with a highly aggressive cash and stock offer. They offered Baker Hughes shareholders 1.12 shares of Halliburton plus $19 in cash per share. This valued the whole deal at that $34.6 billion mark. Now, Baker Hughes actually resisted at first, but Halliburton literally threatened a damaging hostile takeover bid and offered a premium price to force Baker Hughes to agree to the terms in November of 2014.
Section 3. The antitrust alarm bells, when three competitors become two.
But as you might guess, signing the paperwork is only the very first step. Almost immediately, the deal hit a regulatory brick wall, and it all comes down to antitrust law. These are regulations strictly designed to prevent monopolies, promote market competition, and protect customers from artificially high prices or reduced innovation. Regulators honestly don't care if a merger saves two corporations a bunch of money. Their job is to protect the market.
And this brilliantly illustrates the exact problem: market concentration. Among globally integrated suppliers, there were really only three main players: Schlumberger, Halliburton, and Baker Hughes. This merger wasn't just a big deal. It was a proposition to take the big three and shrink them down to the big two. Halliburton and Baker Hughes would eat up each other's slice of the pie to aggressively challenge the market leader.
Because they operated in 80 countries, international watchdogs were immediately terrified. The European Union opened an in-depth probe. As EU Commissioner Margrethe Vestager stated directly, the Commission has to look closely at this proposed takeover to make sure that it would not reduce choice or push up prices for oil and gas exploration and production services in the EU. They were deeply worried that going from 3 integrated suppliers to 2 would completely destroy competitive tendering. Over in the United States, the Department of Justice was even more alarmed. The DOJ warned that the merger presumptively violated Section 7 of the Clayton Act. Why? Because the merger would eliminate substantial head-to-head competition in at least 23 distinct oilfield services and products markets in the U.S. alone. We're talking about everything from specialized drill bits to complex completion fluids. The overlap was simply way too massive. Section 4. The doomed divestiture plan. Selling assets to save the deal. Now, Halliburton knew this massive market overlap would be a problem from day one, so they proposed a strategy called divestiture. This is when a company promises to sell off subsidiary business assets, facilities, or product lines just to satisfy regulatory competition concerns. Basically, Halliburton said, hey, if we overlap in a specific drill bit market, we'll just sell off Baker Hughes' drill bit factory to a third party so competition stays exactly the same. Halliburton promised to sell off up to $7.5 billion in assets, but the plan had some absolutely critical flaws. The DOJ labeled this one of the most complex and riskiest remedies ever contemplated. Why? Well, because you can't just easily carve out pieces of a highly integrated global operation. Halliburton's plan tried to awkwardly divide hundreds of facilities across the world. It tried to split up crucial intellectual property and research divisions. Worse, many key customer contracts weren't even going to transfer to the new buyer. The regulators looked at this messy garage sale of assets and concluded it would never, ever recreate the fierce independent competition that Baker Hughes provided. Which brings us to Section 5. The collapse and breakup fee, the multi-billion-dollar penalty. With the regulatory agencies flat out refusing to accept the divestiture plan, the writing was on the wall. Looking at the timeline, the deal was agreed to in November 2014. For a whole year, the companies tried to negotiate the regulatory hurdles. But by November 2015, the EU launched an in-depth probe. Then came the fatal blow. In April 2016, the US DOJ officially filed a lawsuit in federal court to block the merger entirely. Just a few weeks later, on May 1, 2016, under mounting global pressure, Halliburton and Baker Hughes threw in the towel and officially abandoned the merger. But walking away wasn't free. Remember earlier I mentioned Baker Hughes initially resisted the takeover because of antitrust fears? Well, to get them to agree, Halliburton had to accept the financial risk, using a mechanism called a reverse breakup fee. This is a massive financial penalty paid by the buyer, in this case Halliburton, to the target company, Baker Hughes, if the deal fails to close specifically for antitrust reasons. And that penalty was a devastating $3.5 billion. That represented roughly 10% of the original deal value. Because Halliburton failed to get antitrust approval, and because they failed to offer a divestiture plan that regulators actually accepted, Halliburton had to write a $3.5 billion check to their biggest rival, receiving absolutely nothing in return.
Section 6. Lessons for future megadeals. Why this failure matters today.
So, what does this catastrophic corporate failure actually teach us about strategy moving forward? Here are the crucial takeaways for future megadeals. First, unprecedented market overlaps, especially those that reduce a big three to a big two, are going to face insurmountable global antitrust scrutiny. Second, you cannot fix a highly integrated market overlap by offering a messy, complex divestiture of scattered assets. Regulators simply won't buy it. And third, massive reverse breakup fees shift extreme financial risk entirely to the buyer, making hostile, risky acquisitions incredibly dangerous. Which leaves us with a pretty provocative question for the future. In an era of heightened global regulation, could any future Big Three merger in the energy sector ever truly survive this level of intense scrutiny?
It certainly makes you view the next headline about a billion-dollar merger a little differently, doesn't it? We've drawn all our data, timelines, and quotes for today's explainer directly from the primary sources listed here, including the original DOJ antitrust complaint and the EU Commission press release. This is the next shift: energy, science, and technology explained clearly.